no over-the-top rules. We were totally reasonable, thoughtful parents who made solid decisions at every turn.
For decades, Ron Howard has been Hollywood's symbol of calm. The quiet professional who built a spotless career and earned the industry's trust. But behind that perfect image lies a truth he never wanted the world to know. The same fame that made him beloved also carried a weight that nearly consumed him. Away from the cameras, his life followed a far darker script, one written in silence, fear, and the price of perfection.
I spend a little too much time actually sort of giving a about what people think.
The boy who never asked for fame. Ron Howard was born in March 1954 in Duncan, Oklahoma, to Rance and Jean Howard, a young couple struggling to keep their acting dreams alive. They were not rich or famous, only hopeful and desperate, surviving on small stage roles and bit parts while raising their red-haired son. When Ron was still a baby, Rance reportedly brought him onto a film set because the production needed a child for one short scene in Frontier Woman. It was meant to be harmless, just a favor for the crew, but that moment quietly shaped Ron's entire future. He had no lines, no plan, and no choice. His first appearance on screen happened before he even understood what a camera was. In the years that followed, Rance decided to move his family to California, believing it was the only place where their acting careers could grow. By 1958, they packed what little they owned and made the trip west. Interviews later revealed that they pawned furniture, jewelry, and even some of Ron's toys to pay for the move. The Howards settled in a small home in Burbank, near several major studios. For Rance and Jean, it was a chance to start fresh. For Ron, it was the beginning of a life that would always feel watched. He grew up hearing directors shout orders and seeing strangers pretend to live perfect lives while his parents worried about overdue rent. As he got older, Ron began to act more often, and what had started as a family dream slowly became his responsibility. Acting was no longer just something his parents pursued. It became the family's only way to survive. Reports suggest that his parents were cautious about letting him work too early. They refused to sign long-term contracts until he turned 5, hoping to protect him. But that decision also meant months of financial strain. Some neighbors remembered seeing the Howards count coins to buy groceries. Rance and Jean told friends they only wanted Ron to learn discipline, not fame. But every role he got helped them stay afloat. Their intentions were good, but their survival depended on their son's face. By age 4, Ron had begun appearing in small television parts. Some of his earliest appearances were in Playhouse 90 and The Red Skelton Hour. He later earned his first credited film role in The Journey in 1959. Crew members recalled that he rarely complained, even when he was tired and fell asleep between takes. In the 1950s, few rules existed to protect children on film sets, and long hours were common. According to one interview, when a director first called cut, Ron clapped along with the crew, thinking it was part of the game. What he did not understand then was that the game had just become his life. Acting would no longer be something he played at. It would define everything that came after. Every performance carried the weight of his parents' hopes. Every mistake felt like it could send them back to Oklahoma. What the world saw as a lucky beginning, Ron experienced as responsibility. Soon that same spotlight that rescued his family from poverty would pull him into a world that demanded perfection, where childhood was no longer play, but performance. The illusion of a perfect childhood. When Ron Howard was 6 years old, he was cast as Opie Taylor in The Andy Griffith Show. His father, Rance Howard, helped him prepare for the audition, hoping it would open doors for the family. The series began airing in 1960 and became an instant success. To the American public, Opie was the picture of innocence, a sweet boy who learned life lessons from his wise father in a small town that represented the kind of America people missed. Peaceful streets, kind neighbors, and simple values that felt safe in a changing world. Viewers adored the warmth and values the show represented. For Ron, however, the reality behind the camera was far from the peaceful world he acted in every week. Each episode was filmed with exhausting long hours. The set demanded focus, patience, and perfection. Ron was only a child, but his responsibilities were those of an adult actor. Every line had to be delivered exactly right, and every facial expression mattered. According to crew members, the filming schedule left little time for play or rest. Between takes, Ron often sat quietly with his scripts while production assistants doubled as tutors, teaching him math and reading lessons in a cramped trailer. He missed most school activities and birthday parties, trading classrooms for studio lights. Directors treated Ron more like an adult than a child. They expected him to deliver every line perfectly, no matter how long it took. When he made mistakes, they ordered retakes again and again until he got it right. Some crew members later said that the adults on set often forgot how young he was. He was expected to stay professional and stay calm. The smiles that looked effortless on screen were the result of hours of repetition. Behind the lens, his parents rarely interfered. They had learned that questioning the producers could risk his role. The job paid the family's bills, and keeping it meant staying silent. Ron grew up surrounded by adults who praised his talent but demanded obedience. It did not take long for Ron to understand that what people saw on television was not real life. Everything that looked natural was carefully planned. The laughter, the lessons, and even the warmth of Mayberry, the friendly small town where the show took place, were all created by scripts and cameras. He once told interviewers that even after filming ended, he still felt like Opie because he had spent so much time pretending to be him. The line between who he really was and who he played started to fade. During one outdoor scene filmed by a lake, Ron reportedly slipped from a wet rock and fell into the water. The current was stronger than anyone expected, and his small body vanished beneath the surface before the crew could react. For a few seconds, no one moved, thinking it might be part of the scene. Then the screams started. A camera operator dropped his equipment and ran toward the edge, while others shouted for help. Ron struggled to stay above the water, gasping and reaching out, his eyes wide with panic. He swallowed mouthfuls of muddy water before a grip finally pulled him out by the arm. Shaken and coughing, Ron was wrapped in a blanket and checked by the medic. His knees were bruised, and his hands trembled so badly he could not hold a cup of water. According to reports, filming stopped for only a short while before the crew reset the cameras. The producers told everyone to stay quiet about what had happened. They feared the story could damage the show's clean image. Ron was back on set by afternoon, still shivering, pretending to smile as if nothing had gone wrong. That experience taught Ron a harsh lesson. Image mattered more than reality. Andy Griffith, the star of the show and Ron's on-screen father, soon became a strong figure in his life. Many described him as a mentor who treated Ron like a son both on and off the set. Yet even Andy expected precision. He taught Ron how to deliver emotion on command, showing him when to cry, when to pause, and how to make it look real every time. Ron admired him deeply, but he also learned from Andy that perfection was expected at all times. As the show's fame grew, letters from fans poured in, calling him Opie and thanking him for being a role model for their children. Few letters used his real name. For America, he was not Ron Howard, but a symbol of goodness. That kind of love came with a price. He began to believe that affection could be lost the moment he stopped performing. The public saw a child living a dream. Ron saw a child performing someone else's dream and learning that even love, in Hollywood, had to be earned. The years of rejection and the fear of becoming nobody. When the Andy Griffith Show ended in 1968, Ron Howard was 14 years old. For most of his life, he had been Opie Taylor, a face every American recognized and trusted. But when the cameras stopped rolling, the world moved on without him. Casting directors still smiled when he entered a room, but the smiles were followed by excuses. They said he was too familiar, too clean-cut, or simply not right for the part. It did not matter how hard he tried. Over the next few years, Ron went to more than 50 auditions. He rarely made it past the first round. Some reports say he even stopped telling friends about his auditions because the rejection was becoming embarrassing. The same industry that had once built him up was now politely ignoring him. Producers preferred new faces, and for a teenager who had spent nearly his entire life in front of cameras, invisibility was worse than failure. Ron began to feel trapped between two identities. He was too famous to live a normal life, yet the film industry could no longer see him as anyone other than Opie Taylor. Casting directors had grown so used to his childhood image that they could not picture him playing new or mature characters. Every time he auditioned, people saw the little boy from Mayberry instead of a young actor trying to grow up. To deal with the anxiety, he tried to live like an ordinary high school student. He played basketball, joined small school events, and even delivered newspapers in the mornings to make some money. According to classmates, he was polite but quiet, often lost in thought. Fame had given him attention but taken away his confidence. When he did manage to get small parts, they did little to rebuild his reputation. The audience saw his face and thought of Mayberry. By 1973, he finally landed a significant role in American Graffiti, a film directed by George Lucas. It was supposed to be his comeback, but even that experience turned painful. Co-stars Harrison Ford and Paul Le Mat reportedly bullied him during filming. Crew members recalled seeing them throw bottles near his car and mock him for being a former child star. They even locked him in a trailer once, laughing as they shouted, "Dance, Opie, dance." Ron never fought back. He smiled through it, finishing the movie as if nothing had happened. Years later, he would admit that it was one of the most humiliating moments of his life. That experience changed him. He stopped trying to win people over with friendliness and began relying on discipline and control. In his mind, mastery was protection. He promised himself he would never be laughed at again. He had entered Hollywood as a child who wanted approval, but by the end of those years, approval no longer mattered. What mattered was power, the power to never feel small again. It was a quiet transformation that marked the start of the perfectionist he would later become. And so, when television called him back with Happy Days only a year later, he returned to the screen a changed man, one who smiled on camera but guarded every part of himself the moment the lights went off. The golden boy who refused to smile. When Happy Days premiered in 1974, Ron Howard was only 19. The show quickly became one of America's most popular sitcoms, pulling him back into the fame he thought he had outgrown. He played Richie Cunningham, the clean-cut teenager every parent wanted their son to be. The show's bright lights, laughter, and success looked like the perfect second chance. But inside, Ron felt something different. The attention that once thrilled him as a child now felt heavy. He was back in the same world he had tried to escape, surrounded by applause that no longer sounded kind. As Happy Days gained popularity, the focus of the show began to shift. By 1976, audiences had fallen in love with a new character, the leather-jacketed Fonzie, played by Henry Winkler. The producers noticed and started centering more episodes around him. Studio reports later showed that executives even debated changing the show's title to Fonzie's Happy Days. For Ron, that idea was humiliating. He had carried the show since its beginning, yet he was now being pushed into the background. He smiled through interviews, calling Winkler a close friend, but behind closed doors he felt replaced. People who worked on the show recalled that Ron often stayed late to review scripts or rewrite lines for his scenes. He wanted to prove he was still essential. Cheryl, his high school sweetheart, began to notice how much the stress affected him. She could tell how his day had gone just by looking at the untouched coffee on the counter or the pile of scripts beside him. He came home exhausted, sometimes too tired to eat dinner. According to friends, he rarely joined cast parties or public events. When invited, he would simply say, "I need to get ready for tomorrow." Although Happy Days made him one of television's highest-paid young stars, the success felt empty. The world adored Richie Cunningham, but Ron no longer knew how to enjoy his own achievements. In private, he once told Cheryl, half joking, that he did not know how to have fun unless it was written in a script. The laughter from the audience only reminded him that even joy had become part of the performance. As the show continued to climb in ratings, Ron began to feel trapped again. His career looked golden, but his spirit was growing restless. The fame he had regained felt no different from the fame that once confined him as a child. Soon he realized that acting would never give him the peace he wanted. If he could not escape the spotlight, then he would take control of it from behind the camera. The perfectionist behind the camera. When Ron Howard stepped behind the camera for the first time, it felt like learning a new language. He was no longer reciting lines or pretending to be someone else. Instead, he was building entire worlds through lenses and storyboards. Directing gave him something acting never could: control. He could finally decide how the story unfolded, how every moment looked, and how every emotion landed. But that control soon became an obsession. His first major project, Grand Theft Auto in 1977, was supposed to be a low-budget comedy. For Ron, it became a test of precision. He marked every camera position with chalk crosses that only he could read. Every stunt, every shot, every movement was planned to the smallest detail. During one car sequence, a crash went wrong, injuring a stuntman. The accident terrified him. According to crew members, he spent nights awake, replaying what had happened and writing notes on how to prevent another mistake. From that point on, he began carrying a small notebook labeled Safety, filled with sketches, angles, and risk calculations. His focus on control grew stronger with each film. On Splash in 1984, he insisted on personally checking the water depth before actors entered the pool. Crew members recalled seeing him wade in fully clothed, counting his steps and testing the lighting reflections. He trusted no measurement that was not his own. On set, he timed explosions with a stopwatch and double-checked safety rigs even after experts had already cleared them. Some people said he was overly cautious. Others believed he was haunted by the fear of another accident. Ron's process became a ritual. He would walk through sets at dawn before anyone else arrived, quietly studying the cables, lights, and props. Assistants learned never to move a light without asking him first. Some called it superstition, others called it discipline, but everyone respected it. Crew members joked that he could rebuild an entire set from memory, and often he could. Every frame mattered. Every second of film was a small battle between order and chaos. Actors admired his calm focus, even if they wondered when he found time to rest. To them, he seemed unshakable, but that calmness was only the surface. Directing was no longer about creativity. It had become a way for him to keep fear under control. Each perfect frame was his proof that the world could hold still for a moment. But the same control that gave him peace on set soon became his public identity. Hollywood saw only his calm, not his exhaustion. They began to treat his discipline as a brand, and the man who once directed to feel free found himself trapped in the very image that success had built for him. The darkness he couldn't control. By the late 2010s, the calm, polite image that had defined Ron Howard for decades began to wear him down. For years, Hollywood had called him the director who never panics, a phrase repeated in articles and interviews as if it were a fact of nature. He was the man who could handle anything without shouting, without slipping, without ever appearing tired. The world saw steadiness. What no one saw was how much of it was an act. Ron had learned early that calmness could open doors. He smiled through red carpets, shook hands, and gave interviews where every answer sounded patient and kind. But those who knew him best understood that behind the soft voice and reassuring tone was a man constantly fighting to hold himself together. He did not allow anger or exhaustion to show. Every emotion was managed, every appearance rehearsed. The kindness that had once been natural had become performance. It was not deceit, it was survival. By the time he entered his 60s, the weight of that performance began to show. Friends noticed the pauses before he spoke, the moments when he looked at the ground instead of at people. On set, he worked longer hours than ever, but something had changed. According to one crew member, he no longer looked thrilled by the work. He looked haunted by it. His sense of control, the very thing that had built his career, had become a cage. In private, he began to admit what he had never said aloud. In one quiet conversation, he reportedly told a close friend that he no longer knew who he was when he was not directing. The films had become his only way to feel real. But as his projects grew larger and his reputation more demanding, the same obsession that had saved him began to consume him. He had built entire worlds for other people, but could not find peace in his own. According to unverified reports, there were days when he would stay in his office long after everyone else had gone home, sitting in the dark with old storyboards spread across the desk. He was no longer building films. He was trying to keep his thoughts from collapsing. His fear of chaos had grown worse with age. Failure, loss, and time itself frightened him. He checked schedules, corrected details, and redrafted scenes long after the cameras stopped rolling. Rumors about Ron's declining state began to spread quietly through the industry. Some said he looked exhausted. Others believed he was simply worn down by the weight of his own discipline. Nothing was ever confirmed, but those who met him in later years described a man running on the smallest measure of energy, as if life had become a performance he no longer wanted to rehearse. His eyes, once alert and steady, now carried the look of someone who had not truly rested in years. At home, the change was impossible to ignore. Dinner became quiet, the air filled with the hum of unfinished thoughts. Cheryl, who had stood by him since high school, reportedly asked him to take a step back, to let someone else take charge for once. But he could not. Rest frightened him more than exhaustion. When he stopped working, memories surfaced, old pressures, old failures, the faces of the people he could never quite please. The silence of an empty room reminded him that without work, he no longer knew who he was. Insomnia followed him like a shadow. Colleagues noticed how he arrived early, stayed late, and never looked fully awake. According to unverified reports, friends worried that he had lost the ability to separate himself from the characters and stories he directed. One moment revealed more than any statement could. During the filming of Rush, after a stunt driver was seriously injured, witnesses said Ron locked himself inside his trailer for hours. He refused to speak to anyone, only whispering to himself, "Not again." It was as if something in him broke that day. The boy who had once fallen into a lake and nearly drowned had spent his life trying to hold everything above water. That was the real darkness in Ron Howard's life. It was not scandal or crime. It was fear. Fear so deep it ruled him. Fear of losing what he built. Fear of losing himself. The world saw a calm genius, a man in complete control. He saw fragility, a quiet panic he could never escape. The control that made him great had finally become his prison. And yet, time does what control never can. It softens. As the years passed, the same man who once fought chaos began to understand that not everything can be fixed. For the first time, he started to let go. The Legacy of Light and Shadow. In 2025, a photo of Ron Howard and his wife Cheryl celebrating their 50th anniversary went viral. The image showed two people standing side by side, smiling softly, their expressions calm and weathered. To many, it was a reminder of lasting love in an industry that often burns through it. For Ron, it was a moment of quiet reflection. He had spent most of his life surrounded by cameras, yet this photograph, simple, unplanned and real, captured more truth than decades of his films ever had. His daughter, Bryce Dallas Howard, had by then become a successful actress and director in her own right. She often spoke publicly about her father's influence, describing him as a man who built the ladder we all climb. Her words filled Ron with pride but also guilt. He wondered if he had handed his children the freedom to create or the pressure to live up to his legacy. According to one interview, he once admitted that watching Bryce direct gave him both joy and discomfort. He admired her control, but recognized the same weight he had once carried, the burden of wanting every frame to be perfect. In his later years, Ron no longer chased awards or studio projects. He reviewed student films, offering advice written in blue ink on the margins of scripts. He told young directors to leave space for life to happen, a lesson he had learned too late. Visitors to his home often noticed the walls of his study covered with storyboards from unfinished projects placed beside his grandchildren's colorful drawings. The smell of old film reels, mixed with crayons, filling the room with the scent of memory and continuation. Ron still thought about the scenes he never finished, the words he never said, but the urgency had faded. The darkness had not left him, but it had grown quieter. No longer an enemy, only a reminder. Ron Howard had spent a lifetime creating light for the world, but in the end, he found peace by learning to live in its shadow. Ron Howard spent his life chasing light, but living in its shadow. Do you think fame can ever come without a cost? Share your thoughts in the comments.